If you listen closely, deep in the emerald lungs of the Amazon, the jungle still whispers a single name, El Dorado, a word born from gold and greed, from the shimmer of sunlight on water and the flicker of madness in the human heart. For centuries, it has haunted maps, consumed kings, and swallowed men whole. But before it became a myth carved into every explorer's dream, El Dorado was a story whispered in smoke, painted in dust, and sung beside rivers that gleamed like liquid fire. The first to speak it were not conquerors. They were people of the high Andes, the Muisca, a civilization older than memory, living in what is now Colombia. To them, the story wasn't about gold at all. It was about sacrifice, about a ritual older than conquest, the legend of the Gilded Man. At dawn, when the world still felt sacred, the Muisca would take their new leader to the sacred Lake Guatavita. He would be stripped naked, covered head to toe in powdered gold until his skin shone like the sun itself. Then, aboard a raft of reeds, he would sail to the center of the lake, there surrounded by priests and warriors. He would throw offerings, emeralds, gold figurines, and treasures into the dark waters. Finally, he too would dive in, washing away the gold, returning it to the earth, as if to say, riches belong to the gods, not to men. But when the Spanish heard this story, something changed. To them, it wasn't a tale of faith, it was a map. In Iusenlo, when Gonzalo Jimenez de Quesada marched into the Andes with a few hundred starving men, he found the Muisca and he heard the whispers of the Golden Man. By the time he returned to Spain, the legend had mutated. No longer a single ritual, it had become an entire kingdom of gold, hidden somewhere in the heart of the continent. A city paved with treasure, its rivers shimmering with dust, its temples cast from the sun. Soon the name El Dorado no longer belonged to one man, but to the fever that infected every explorer who heard it. They came in waves, conquistadors, dreamers, lunatics, poets, each one convinced that somewhere beyond the horizon, beyond the rivers, beyond the jungle, there lay a city that would make them gods. Francisco Orellana, who drifted down the great river now called the Amazon. Pedro Jusua, who marched into green oblivion, never to return. Sir Walter Raleigh, who risked the wrath of a queen and sailed to his doom chasing shadows of gold. Each man saw it differently, a palace, a temple, a paradise. But what they truly sought was not gold, it was immortality. The myth fed on their hunger, reshaping itself with every expedition. When one explorer failed, another rewrote the story. When one lake yielded no gold, the legend moved deeper into the forest. El Dorado was alive, not as a place, but as an idea that refused to die. And as the centuries passed, it grew stronger, because the less it was found, the more people believed it must be real. The maps of the time became riddled with lies, lakes that never existed, mountains drawn by guesswork, rivers misplaced by hundreds of miles. But on every one of them, somewhere, there was a mark, a small symbol, a promise. El Dorado, it was the world's greatest ghost story, told not by the dead, but by the desperate. By 1541, one of the most infamous expeditions had begun. Gonzalo Pizarro, half-brother of Francisco Pizarro, the man who conquered the Inca Empire, gathered 340 Spaniards and over 4,000 natives. They marched east, into the unmapped wilderness. What they found was not gold, but hell. The jungle was a living thing, vast, wet, endless. Men sank into mud that reached their knees. The insects bled them dry. The heat broke their minds. They boiled leather to eat. They drank from puddles tainted with rot. And still, the rumor kept them moving. They reached the Napo River, carved rafts, and drifted downstream half alive in those final days. Gonzalo's men splintered. One of them, Francisco de Orellana, chose to continue down the river. He would be the first European to travel the full length of the Amazon. He found no gold, but his story would inspire countless others to lose themselves in the green labyrinth after him. It's strange, isn't it? How a single word, gold, can turn faith into obsession, bravery into madness. The jungle didn't de El Dorado. It became it. The vines, the rivers, the fog, they weren't obstacles, they were guardians, as if nature itself conspired to keep its secret from those who sought it most. And so, the legend deepened. What began as a man coated in gold became a city, then an empire, then a world beneath the canopy, glowing just beyond reach. El Dorado was no longer a destination. It was a mirror reflecting humanity's greatest hunger, to turn dreams into something we can hold. They called it a quest for glory. But what unfolded in the green heart of South America was closer to a descent into madness. By the mid-16th century, El Dorado was no longer a rumor. It was a fever that spread from port to port, map to map, man to man. The Spanish Empire had taken the Inca gold, but the hunger remained unsatisfied. Every conquistador wanted his own empire of shining metal, his own legend carved into history. And so they turned their eyes east into the uncharted jungles, where rivers shimmered like veins of treasure. The expedition of Gonzalo Pizarro had ended in exhaustion and ruin, but word spread of one man who had gone further. Francisco de Orellana. He claimed to have discovered lands of unimaginable wealth along the Amazon, and his tales, like gold dust on the wind, clung to every ear that heard them. Soon a new wave of adventurers assembled: soldiers, mercenaries, thieves, priests, each carrying a dream brighter than reason. In Ling, Pedro de Ursu led one of the most infamous expeditions in the search for El Dorado. He was a nobleman from Spain, determined, ambitious, and perhaps naive. His army marched into the jungle from Peru, hundreds of men strong. Behind him followed horses, slaves, and women, including a mysterious mistress named Inés de Et. It was said she was as captivating as the myth they pursued. The journey began with order, but as the days turned to weeks and weeks into months, discipline rotted, men quarreled, food dwindled, and disease spread faster than faith. The jungle watched in silence, patient as death. Among Ursu's men was a soldier named Lope de Aguirre, a Basque mercenary, intelligent but consumed by pride. He had fought in Peru, killed without hesitation, and believed himself chosen by destiny. To him, El Dorado wasn't just a city, it was a test, a promise from God that he would rise above kings. When the expedition reached the Maronan River, Ursuayasitayat, his supplies were running low. The men begged him to turn back, but Aguirre whispered in the shadows, feeding their doubts, twisting loyalty into rebellion. Soon the whispers grew louder than orders, and one night, steel spoke louder than prayer. Pedro de Ursu was murdered by his own men. Aguirre declared himself commander. He called himself the Wrath of God. From that moment, the expedition was no longer a search for gold. It became a nightmare painted in blood. Aguirre, driven by paranoia, accused his followers of treason, executed them, and cast their bodies into the river. He crowned himself Prince of Peru, claiming to overthrow the King of Spain and rule over the lands of El Dorado himself. Men who once dreamed of treasure now marched through the jungle in chains, bound by fear of the man beside them. They saw friends disappear in the night, heard screams in the mist, and still they followed. Because hope, once planted, is harder to kill than the body that carries it. When Aguirre finally reached the coast, he found no city, no gold, no salvation. Only the reflection of his own madness staring back at him from the water. He wrote letters to the King of Spain, wild rambling messages declaring himself immortal and condemning the empire that made him. Then, hunted and cornered, he murdered his daughter to keep her from falling into enemy hands. The man who once sought a kingdom of gold ended with nothing but silence. Aguirre became a ghost, a symbol of what the legend could do to the human mind. But the myth of El Dorado did not die with him. It adapted, transformed, and moved again deeper into the unknown. Soon it leapt across oceans. By the late 1500s, El Dorado had reached the ears of another empire, England. At the court of Queen Elizabeth I, tales of golden cities in the New World stirred ambitions once again. Among those who listened was a man whose name would become inseparable from the myth: Sir Walter Raleigh. Raleigh was no ordinary adventurer. He was a poet, a soldier, and one of the Queen's favorites. Charming, bold, and restless. But like all who came before him, he too hungered for more. He wanted glory beyond poetry, a discovery that would place England above Spain. And so, in 1595, he set sail for the northern coasts of South America, what is now Guyana and Venezuela. When he arrived, the jungle stretched before him like a living wall. The rivers glittered in the sun, and the air carried the scent of decay and promise. Local tribes spoke of a great kingdom inland, the Manoa. They called it a city by a golden lake, ruled by a mighty king. To Raleigh it was confirmation. The story lived. He led his men up the Orinoco River, through lands thick with vines and mist. They battled fever, insects, and exhaustion. Some died, others deserted. Yet Raleigh pressed on, convinced that just beyond the next bend, the city awaited. He never found El Dorado. But when he returned to England, he wrote as if he had. His book, The Discovery of the Large, Rich, and Beautiful Empire of Guyana, was filled with vivid descriptions: golden temples, shining lakes, and treasures beyond imagination. It was part truth, part dream, part calculated deceit, but it worked. Europe was enthralled again. Painters, poets, and kings whispered the name El Dorado as if it were a spell. Expeditions multiplied. Mapmakers filled blank spaces with shimmering cities that didn't exist, and every explorer who vanished into the jungle only made the myth more real. For the people of the Americas, the cost was unimaginable. Thousands of lives lost to foreign greed, ancient cultures destroyed in the wake of men chasing shadows. The gold they sought was often taken from sacred offerings, melted, reshaped, and carried across the sea, stripped of meaning. To the Muisca and other tribes, gold was not wealth. It was a bridge between the human and the divine. But to the Europeans, it was the measure of power itself. Centuries passed, the world changed, empires rose and fell, and still, somewhere deep in the jungles, the story of El Dorado slept beneath the roots, waiting for another dreamer to disturb its rest. Even as the age of exploration waned, new seekers emerged: geologists, archaeologists, soldiers, and wanderers with modern tools but the same hunger. Some searched the depths of Lake Guatavita, dragging up mud and bones. Others scanned the mountains of Venezuela or the vast Amazon basin, certain that they were closer than ever. None found a city of gold, but each uncovered fragments, relics, clues, echoes of the truth behind the myth. El Dorado was no longer just a lost place. It had become a reflection of human nature itself, a reminder that what we chase often reveals what we lack. The Spanish sought gold to fill their coffers. The English sought it to claim glory. The modern world seeks it still, though now the gold is not metal, but power, fame, and the illusion of endless discovery. And yet, despite everything, the lies, the deaths, the madness, we still listen when the jungle whispers that name. Because in every age, there are those who believe that somewhere, untouched and shining, a dream still waits to be found. The deeper they went, the quieter the world became. The jungle swallowed sound, the clash of armor, the cries of men, even the prayers whispered into the darkness. Those who sought El Dorado believed they were entering an undiscovered paradise. What they found instead was a labyrinth of life and death. The forest was not empty. It was alive, endless, breathing, ancient. It had seen empires rise and vanish long before the Spaniards ever crossed the ocean. Every leaf, every vine, every creature was part of a vast, unknowable intelligence, and it did not yield its secrets easily. The conquistadors, armored in steel, imagined they could conquer the wilderness as they had conquered kingdoms. But the jungle was not a kingdom, it was a god. And gods have patience. Rivers led them in circles. Hunger gnawed at their minds. They built rafts that broke apart within days, leaving them stranded in the green abyss. The rain fell without end, drenching their gunpowder, spoiling their food, softening their skin until it tore like paper. Some saw phantom lights at night, glimmers through the fog that looked like fires from a distant city. Men would run toward them, screaming that they had found gold, only to vanish into the darkness, swallowed whole. Disease followed, fever struck like lightning. Those who survived the sickness often didn't survive their own minds. They began to see the jungle itself as an enemy, one that breathed and hunted. They said the trees whispered in strange tongues, that faces appeared in the bark, that the rivers changed course to trap them. By the 17th century, the search for El Dorado had claimed thousands of lives. Entire expeditions disappeared without a trace. Ships sank in sudden storms. Towns built to supply explorers fell into ruin. And yet, new men always arrived, carrying new maps, new promises, and the same doomed faith. Because obsession is a kind of inheritance, once it's passed down, it refuses to die. In Europe, the stories grew bolder with every retelling. The Golden Man became a king with eyes of amber and a crown that shone brighter than dawn. The lake became an ocean, the city became an empire, and the truth, the quiet, sacred ritual of the Muisca was buried beneath centuries of imagination. But not everyone believed the myths. Some began to ask, what if El Dorado was never meant to be found? What if the real treasure was something else entirely? In the late 1800s, explorers began returning to Lake Guatavita, the lake where the legend began. Armed with modern tools and Victorian arrogance, they tried to drain it. They cut channels, dug trenches, and used pumps to lower the water. For a moment, it worked. The level dropped, revealing the lake's muddy bottom, and there they found what the legend had promised: fragments of gold, emeralds, and intricate artifacts. But not a city, not a kingdom, just offerings, the physical remains of a people's faith. The discovery proved that the Muisca ritual was real, but it also revealed the truth that the conquistadors never understood. El Dorado was never a place to be conquered. It was a story of giving, not taking. As the modern world dawned, new explorers followed the same paths. They came with cameras, notebooks, and scientific instruments instead of swords. Men like Alexander von Humboldt, one of the first to describe the vastness of the Amazon, and later explorers who mapped its depths, saw the jungle not as an enemy, but as a mystery that deserved respect. Still, the dream of El Dorado persisted, only now it wore the mask of discovery. In the 20th century, the legend found new life again. Adventurers claimed to have located ruins in the mountains of Venezuela or the dense forests of Brazil. Each time the world held its breath. Each time the truth dissolved into the mist. Even in modern archaeology, traces of gold-working cultures have surfaced across the region in Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru, but none so vast or opulent as the mythical city itself. What they found instead were networks, thriving civilizations connected by rivers, trade, and art. The jungle, once thought empty, turned out to be home to millions long before European maps arrived. Satellite images now reveal geometric shapes beneath the forest canopy, the remains of ancient roads, canals, and settlements. They suggest that the Amazon was once a cultivated land, a patchwork of human creation and natural wonder. In a way, it was an empire but not of gold. An empire of green, living in harmony with the earth, invisible to those who came looking for glitter. And so, perhaps El Dorado did exist, not as a city of gold, but as a civilization of wisdom, a people who understood that true wealth is balance, that the land is not something to own but to revere. The Europeans never found El Dorado because they never truly looked for what it was. They searched for what they desired, not for what was there. And the jungle, patient as time, simply waited for them to destroy themselves. It is said that when the last of the great expeditions vanished, the tribes along the rivers began to tell a new story. They said the jungle had taken back the gold because it was tired of mankind's hunger. that deep beneath the roots, the spirits of the explorers still wander, searching endlessly for a light that no longer exists. Modern scientists, studying the Amazon's ecology, found something hauntingly poetic. The soil, called terra preta or black earth, is man-made, enriched by ancient hands. It is proof that a lost knowledge once existed, the ability to transform the earth, to make it bloom where it should not. The real miracle of El Dorado might not have been gold at all, but this hidden science, a gift of cultivation, not conquest. But still, even now, when you stand in the jungle at dawn and the mist rolls across the rivers, there's a feeling, a weight in the air, as if the earth itself remembers, as if the ghosts of those who came before are still whispering just out of reach. The legend of El Dorado has survived every failure, every truth, every death, because it was never just a legend. It was a reflection of our own nature, our need to believe that somewhere, beyond reason, beyond maps, lies something perfect, something eternal. Perhaps that's why explorers still dream of it, why writers still chase it, why filmmakers still paint it in gold. Because El Dorado isn't gone. It has simply moved from the jungle into the human soul. Centuries have passed, yet the name still shimmers El Dorado. It glows in our imagination like a mirage that refuses to fade. The maps have changed, the jungles have been charted, satellites now watch every inch of the earth, but somewhere deep within us, the story remains alive. We still whisper about the city of gold, as if we might find it tomorrow, glinting beneath the waves of mist and memory, because El Dorado was never just a place. It was a mirror showing us who we are when desire consumes reason. It was the story of human longing, dressed in the color of sunlight. The explorers who vanished in the green abyss became symbols of obsession. Their greed, their hope, their madness, all recorded in the fading ink of forgotten journals. Yet behind every conquest was a man who truly believed. A man who thought he could find meaning in gold, immortality in discovery. They weren't just seeking treasure, they were chasing transcendence. And in that, they were not so different from us. Today, El Dorado lives on, in books, in paintings, in the glow of cinema screens. Every era has resurrected it in its own image. To the Spanish Empire, it was divine destiny. To the Victorians, it was adventure.